sure that they would deeply appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to bring a message. From the start of the year, we've been talking about knowing God. And I don't know, we haven't yet talked about 2020 vision. I'm sure lots of churches are going to be using that for 2020. They'll be talking about their vision for 2020. We will not use 2020 vision, believe me, because we're going to get sick and tired of seeing that being used across Facebook and other places as we move into 2020. But looking forward, I'm kind of wondering, should we just go back and start all over again? Because we've had a great teaching series this year on knowing God. But I wonder how many of us really, truly get it. And that's my big concern, that we can put so much effort into preparing for worship, preparing the message, preparing the service, but yet we just don't get it. Thank God for those who do get it. And we deeply appreciate the fact that there are those, and we know that people genuinely want to hear from God, want to know God, and want to pursue Him in His ways. And I just want to say this year has been a great year. The teaching has been amazing. The worship's been amazing. And we thank God for His blessings upon this church. And following on the theme of that, because of stuff that's happening across our world, I thought that maybe the next couple of weeks that I'll be speaking on end time situations. And so I'm going to be speaking this morning on knowing the signs of the times. So much has been said today about God's kingdom in the songs. And no one knew what I was going to be preaching on until I put it on Facebook last night. So they weren't selected for this, but most of the songs focused in on Jesus being king, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, His kingdom. And we're going to get to that as we go through this message this morning. So it's knowing the signs of the times. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, just one verse, 1 Chronicles chapter 12 and verse 32, we're told, the sons of Issachar. What a name. That'd be a great name for a knock-knock joke. Knock-knock, who's there? Issachar. But anyway, the sons of Issachar understood the times and knew what Israel should do. The sons of Issachar, they understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. Issachar was the fifth son of Jacob. So when we see a reference towards the sons of Issachar, it's actually referencing the tribe of Issachar, one of those 12 tribes in Israel. And this was a tribe, these were people that God enabled to understand what was happening around them. You read through the book of Judges, for example, you will see how that they got alongside the judges, those who had to step into the role of leadership within the nation of Israel, and how the Issachar stepped up and they stood alongside the judges, like Deborah and Barak, and they stood alongside them and gave them the support and the encouragement that they needed. They understood what was going on. They understood the signs of the times, and they also knew what they needed to do. You know, it's my belief that God not only enables us to know His ways. Moses was enabled by God to know His ways. The people were enabled to see and to understand the acts of God, the deeds of God. But it's my belief that God not only enables us to know His ways and to know His acts and His deeds, but He also enables us to understand the times that we're living in. And then it enables us to know what we should do in the midst of those times and those circumstances. And I tell you, our world is confused. We live in a confused world. And because the world is confused, it seems to me the church is adding to that confusion. There's confusion across the world, and there's confusion within the church. But yet God wants to bring revelation to His people and help us to understand the signs of the times, so at least we, the people of God, would know what to do and that we could give direction to others. I believe it's why Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 2, he said, you know very well that the day of the Lord will come. And it's like Paul is writing to those in Thessalonica, and he's saying, you are the people of God, you are the church of Jesus Christ, and you know very well It's like he's saying, you know these things, you ought to know these things, and you know that the day of the Lord will come. And you know that when it does, it will come like a thief in the night, he said. But he said, you are not in darkness, so that this day should not surprise you. And here's Paul writing to those in the early church at Thessalonica, and he said to them that regardless of what's going on in the world and regardless of what will come upon the world, then you, the church, you know there's a day coming, and you know what to do as you approach that day, and it should not surprise you. It shouldn't catch you unawares. When the rapture takes place, the rapture just means to be caught up. And we'll be caught up to meet the Lord in the earth. When the rapture takes place, many of us are going to be caught up. Some are going to be caught out and caught on. What a day that's going to be. But then Peter writes, listen to this in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. Peter, it's like almost anything that Paul says, Peter says. Anything that Paul does, Peter does. You read through the book of Acts, if Paul heals someone that's blind, Peter will heal someone that's blind. Paul raises someone from the dead, Peter will raise someone from the dead. And so it goes on. And now Peter says in 1 Peter 3 and verse 10, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. That's what Paul said. And he said, the heavens will disappear with a roar. We sang about the heavens are roaring today. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire. What's Peter thinking about 2,000 years ago? The elements will be destroyed by fire. The earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. And he's not talking about global warming here. He's talking about something much more radical and much more, I know some believe that that's much more serious, but I'll leave it at that. In verse 11 he says, since everything will be destroyed in this way, and he asks this question. You know, it's like, if we truly believe these things as Christians, the day of the Lord is about to come, the heavens are going to pass away, there's going to be new heavens and a new earth established and so on. Jesus is coming, we're going to set up his judgment throne, and the earth is going to be judged and so on. And if we truly, absolutely believe that, this is what Peter says, since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? So he's throwing out a challenge here. He said, if you really believe that this is going to happen, if you really believe that Jesus Christ is coming back to this earth, then that should cause you to examine how you're living your life. See, we can preach the sermons here, and we preach some good sermons in this place. In fact, not just some, we preach good sermons in this place every single week. But it's one thing us preaching the sermons and singing these incredible songs and having incredible worship. We don't go out those doors and take you home. We don't live with you. We don't spend time with you in your work. We're not sitting in your car with you. We're not sitting in your bedroom with you. We're not there with you. What we can do is we can take this word and then we put it out and ask you to apply this word to your hearts and to your lives and your circumstances. And so the word goes out, what kind of people ought you to be? And we apply that to ourselves as well. And I stand on this platform knowing I've kept my heart pure before God this week. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't stand on this platform at all, believe me. But the problem is that many don't realize that there's a judgment coming and that judgment is coming soon. And it's not just the unsaved who don't realize this, because many Christians go about singing songs about Jesus coming back. He's going to return, set up his kingdom. And then we live our lives as if we don't believe what we're singing and don't believe what we just heard preached in church. But then we ask the question, what's new? Man, we desperately want things to change. We want the people of God to move forward, to get what God is saying. We need to be moving forward. We need to understand the signs of the times. We need to understand what's happening in our generation, what's happening in our world, and then we need to be giving the lead to others. Whether they follow or not is entirely up to them, but we need to be giving that lead. I love the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 2, we read of Nebuchadnezzar. Love that name, King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon. He had a dream, and he sought the interpretation of that dream, but here was the kicker. He didn't want to tell anyone what his dream was. He wanted the soothsayers in Babylon to interpret his dream without him telling them what the dream was. The reason that he did that was he was saying, if you really truly understand these things, then you won't need me to tell you what my dream is. You'll have that revelation as well. So tell me what the dream was and then give me the interpretation. And he said, if you don't do it, you're going to die. Daniel prayed about it. Daniel was there, you know, song by the rivers of Babylon. This is Babylon that had invaded the known world at that time, and Israel was one of those countries, and they took the Israelites out of their homeland and they brought them as captives to Babylon, and there they sat down by the rivers and they refused to sing and so on. And it's in that situation where Daniel found himself, and so he hears what Nebuchadnezzar had put out as a challenge, and he prayed and he sought the face of God. And he became the only person who was not only able to interpret the dream, but able also to tell Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamed. You imagine someone come up to you and said, you had a dream last night, and want to tell me what it means. You would start and say, well, what's the dream? And they say, no, you tell me what the dream was, and then I'll believe that you have the interpretation. That's what Daniel was faced with. But having sought God, Daniel gets the revelation, and he goes to Nebuchadnezzar, and he tells Nebuchadnezzar, I want you to see the screen, that he had seen a large statue. Now, yeah, we got that picture? Okay, now, we don't know that's exactly what it looked like, but he saw an image of a man, a large statue. And listen to this. Daniel then tells the king what he saw in his dream. Daniel saying, in verse 32 of Daniel 2, the head of the statue was made of pure gold, the chest and the arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. The rock became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Now the rock, not going to get into this morning too much, but the rock represents Christ. He's the one who will bring an end to the kingdoms of men. And the mountain that filled the whole earth is not just the church, because since the life of and death and resurrection of Jesus and the establishment of the church now fills the earth. But it's not just about the church, it's about his kingdom. His kingdom will fill the earth, and of his kingdom there will be no end. So he goes on in verse 38, and he says to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, you, king, are the head of gold. In other words, your kingdom, Babylon, is represented by the head of gold. He says, after you, another kingdom will come, another kingdom will arise. And then he says, a third kingdom will arise. And then he said, finally, in verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, but the people will be a mixture and will not remain united. Now keep in mind, Daniel wrote this almost 3,000 years ago. He wrote it when he was in Babylon, before the other empires came along. And if you just take that down now, thanks, so that they're not all reading that and ignore me, because that's what happens. But anyway, so today we live in a world that is an absolute chaos. We see Europe falling apart. And I preached a message like this back in 1997, when I declared then that Europe will fall apart. So we see Europe falling apart. We see China becoming a world power. We see Iran flexing its nuclear muscle and threatening not just peace in the Middle East, but it's threatening world peace. And so we wonder what on earth is going on. And where on earth are we going? I want to tell you, friends, there's only one book that gives us the answers in terms of where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. And it's this book, and it's called the Bible. This book has got the answers. And some of the stuff we're reading about or hearing about in the news today is already recorded here within this particular book. And so Daniel writes of the empires. And basically what he's saying is that these empires that you've dreamed about, Nebuchadnezzar, including yours, these are empires that will rule the world up until the end of time. And then he talks about the fall of these human empires. The first one, the head of gold, put it up again for a few minutes, the head of gold is Babylon. I'll say something more about Babylon in just a moment. The second one, the arms of silver, is the Medo-Persian Empire. That's why two arms representing the Medes and the Persians. Daniel saw this before the empire had taken over from Babylon. Then he says the third will be the belly of bronze. That's the Greek Empire. And history actually stands by these empires. And the fourth one, the legs of iron, represents Rome. Two legs because Rome was not just one united empire. Rome divided in two between the east and the west. You take it down now, thanks. And so the last empire that will come out of these four empires, and especially out of the Roman Empire, he tells us that it will be that it's reflected in the feet and the toes of iron and clay. And so this particular attempt, I'm going to refer to it as an attempt to establish another world empire. That this comes out of the Roman Empire, even after 2,000 years. And that it is formed together with a collection of different nations from mixed backgrounds, represented by the mix of the iron and the clay. And friends, you'll not get any more mixed than what you have in the EU today. Nothing more mixed than this. And so if iron represents Rome, then the feet with iron and clay represent something of Rome mixed with other nations that are represented by the toes and by the clay. You don't need to be a builder to know that iron and clay don't mix. Don't ever let anyone do an extension in your home and use iron and clay. And so Daniel's explanation of world empires shows that the last attempt at building a world empire is connected to the old systems of Babylon and the system of Rome. And again, there's only one system that is like this on planet Earth today, and that's what we call the EU. This is not a political statement. This is coming from the Word of God. And this is why that we know, and those who study this prophecy know and understand that the EU, as it exists in its present form, will not hold together. I believe today, friends, that Brexit is only a start of that. I'm not telling you what way to vote. You vote whatever way you want to vote if ever you get the chance again. But it's only the start of it. Others are waiting. You watch. Others are waiting. And so what's the evidence of an attempt to establish a Europe as a world empire? Surely this is just about economy. Surely this is just about finances. Surely this is just about markets and people working together. It's nothing to do with a United States of Europe. It's nothing to do with a political system or a military system. Well, I say otherwise. I believe the Bible says otherwise. But what's the evidence of it? Well, the evidence is this. The founding treaty of the EU was first signed on the 25th of March, 1957. Do you know where it was signed? In Rome. 6 nations came together to sign that treaty. It's now known as the Treaty of Rome. And every nation that signs up in the EU commit themselves to that initial or that original treaty, the Treaty of Rome. Those 6 nations were France, Germany. You watch what they do after Brexit. France, Germany, well, it was West Germany at that time, but France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Dutch. Our Dutch friends, bless them, the Netherlands, they signed that original agreement. Then in 1992, the numbers doubled from 6 to 12. And those 12 nations, they signed what they called a unity treaty. And that unity treaty paved the way for political union within Europe, because that's always been their goal. Napoleon tried to unite Europe and he failed. Hitler tried to unite Europe and he failed. Even back as far as 1849, there was a writer by the name of Victor Hugo, and this is what he wrote. He says, a day will come. Now, 1849, he wrote this. A day will come when we will see the United States of America and the United States of Europe face to face, reaching out for each other across the seas. See, there's always been a dream of a United States of Europe. Helmut Kohl, the German Chancellor, he said that the vision of the United States of Europe set out by Winston Churchill, no less. In 1946, when the war finished, his dream was, and Kohl agreed with it, was of a United States of Europe, and he said that remains our objective. Chirac of France said that Europe must become a superpower, no longer needing America to be involved in its affairs. These are modern-day leaders. And so there's always been a dream for a United States of Europe, coming from different backgrounds, different languages, different cultures, but all coming together as one, the iron mixed with clay. Daniel's explanation of world empires shows the last attempt at the building of a world empire, but it shows it's connected to Babylon and connected to Rome. We have the Treaty of Rome. How's it connected to Babylon? Do you know where Babylon comes from? It comes from Babel. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. Where men decided that they would build their own tower in order to get themselves to heaven. They could do it on their own without God. So they try to make it to heaven. God then interferes and intervenes. And he scatters them. And then, if you want to know where languages come from, no other book will tell you that but the Bible. Genesis 11, you read how that languages were established on this earth. The building in Strasbourg, which is the Parliament building, is purposely built. It's a modern building, but it's purposely built. You look at it. It's purposely built to look like the Tower of Babel. It's unfinished. You see the parts of the building around the top of it where it is unfinished to make it look like the Tower of Babel, from which we get Babylon. Some of the early posters that went up in order to promote the EU. Can we see that other picture, please? This was one of the early posters that went out promoting the EU, and it shows an image of the Tower of Babel. And it has the words on it, many tongues, one voice. What happened at Babel? They had one voice, and God brought in the languages and dispersed them. Now they're saying, we can do better than God. We can bring all these tongues back together again, and we can create one out of these different languages. It's a complete attack on what happened in Genesis chapter 11 when God confused the languages of humanity at the Tower of Babel. Also look at the stars. If you see the stars, why are those stars upside down? This is an official poster. Why are they upside down? Why is the point not at the top? Do you know that sign is the sign of the devil? You see it. Look at it, the horns, the chin. That's the demonic sign of the devil. Those involved in rock and roll and all that stuff, that's their sign. It's a demonic sign. It's the sign of the devil. And yet they have had it on their poster promoting the EU. Thanks, take it off now. So I want you to note, give me another 5 minutes. I want you to note that the Bible recognizes that there are 6 empires. You go through the Old Testament, you will see 6 empires, 6 major world empires. The first was Egypt. Remember Moses, Joshua, the people in slavery. The second was Assyria. And the third, Babylon. The fourth, the Medo-Persian Empire. The Greek Empire. And then the Roman Empire. 6 empires. Do you know that 6 is the number for man? Do you know that creation was completed on the 6th day and that man was created on the 6th day? Do you know the Bible tells us that 1,000 years is like a day to God, and that we're now at the end of 6,000 years of human history? So we're at the end of 6 days of human history. Do you know that the number for the Antichrist is 666? Do you know that the Antichrist, that many believe the Antichrist will come out of what we refer to as the revived Roman Empire? He will not be American. He will not be Jewish. He will not be Arab. He will arise from within the midst of the European nations. So the Antichrist will come out of what some refer to as the revived Roman Empire, which is still connected to the 6th empire. It's like an extension of it. It's like Jesus Christ has introduced the day of grace 2,000 years, but Rome still has an influence. Not just religiously, but in other ways it still has an influence. Maggie Thatcher at one time said, when she was Prime Minister, Maggie Thatcher said, the world is looking for a man. I want to tell you, the world is still looking for a man today. Someone who will come along and take them out of their chaos. But while the EU is looking for a man to arise from out of its nations, we, the church, are looking for someone who will come from the heavens and will establish His kingdom upon the face of this earth. He is our focus. We're not looking for a man. We're looking for Christ, who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He's the rock that smites the image. And He doesn't smite the image at the head of gold, or the arms of silver, or the belly of bronze, or the legs of iron. He smites the image, the rock smites the image at the feet of iron and clay at the end of time. He's the rock that smites the image. I tell you, when He does so, at that moment in time, the times of the Gentiles, we'll look at that some morning here, but the times of the Gentiles will come to an end fully and completely. At that time when He smites the image at its feet, the kingdoms of men will come to an end, and the kingdom of Christ will be established. And of His kingdom there will be no end. I finish this, friends, by saying this. You can choose today to remain part of the kingdoms of men, or you can choose to be part of His eternal kingdom. It's your choice. But you'll only do so by getting to know Jesus, who is the King of kings. And you'll only get to know Him as King of kings by accepting Him as your King.